Hello and welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast, a podcast where we discuss all things relating to your well-being, ranging from nutrition to physical and mental health. I am Amanda Hayes, your host, a nutritionist with a passion for well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I will take a moment to let you know that you can subscribe to my podcast on YouTube, hit the red subscribe button, or on your favourite podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, or Spotify, or Google Podcasts. I will also mention that although I will often be speaking with experts, any information or advice provided in Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast is not intended to be used to treat, cure, or prevent injuries, disease, or medical conditions, and it is not a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. In general, I am skeptical of dietary fads, especially those spruiked by celebrities with no nutritional qualifications, like, for example, the baby food diet, rumoured to have been started by celebrity trainer Tracy Anderson. The Paleo and Keto diets are in vogue at the moment and popular with numerous celebrities. Therefore, it may be tempting to put them into the fad category. But before we leap to conclusions, let's listen to a scientifically trained expert. I'm honoured to have Rachelle Martin as today's guest on Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast. Rachelle has achieved much in her life, but notably for today's discussion, she's qualified as a nurse, holds a master's degree in human nutrition, and has a nutrition practice within a gastroenterologist's rooms. Put simply, a gastroenterologist deals with the digestive system and its disorders. Given that my own diet is primarily plant-based, I admit to not knowing much about the ins and outs of the paleo or the keto diets, so I'm very interested to put aside how they are sometimes portrayed in the popular media as a license to gorge on bacon and butter and learn from an expert. Hi Rachelle, welcome to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast.
Hi Amanda, thanks for asking me. I'm really happy to be here.
Thank you. So, Rachelle, you worked as a registered nurse in intensive care and now you work as a nutritionist. Can you tell our listeners what drew you to studying nutrition?
Yeah, sure. I've always had a fascination with, I think, two things, food and science. And I got to a point where I decided I didn't really want to return to nursing or working in intensive care. And I was at a crossroads where I was able to choose whether I wanted to go down the path of being a chef or if I wanted to go and combine my love of science with food. And so I gravitated towards a Master of Nutrition.
Oh, excellent. And so you're clearly a pretty good cook as well.
Hopefully. I think I'm okay. Yeah.
I've seen some of your creations on Facebook actually. Very yummy.
Thank you.
So your practice is based in a gastroenterologist's rooms. I imagine there's a good synergy between the medical issues that bring patients to see a gastroenterologist and dietary intake. I assume that many of your clients come to you to lose weight. Is that correct?
That's true. I would say that, there's now a huge number of disorders that I see with regards to what I do with ketogenic diets. Mm-hmm. Where in the past, before I started doing this, it was mainly limited to people with irritable bowel syndrome, right, celiac disease, and people who wanted to lose weight. Mm-hmm. But what was interesting about that was about maybe 2.5 years ago, I actually almost wound up my nutrition practice. And this is interesting because a lot of people who have IBS or irritable bowel syndrome had already learnt about the FODMAP diet or having low FODMAP. And everybody knows that there's now an app that's being produced. And by and large, what I was finding was that my client base was dwindling away and there wasn't much more for me to do if I had kept it in that realm. However, my main focus, and I guess my love and passion, has always been to help people with weight loss. Mm-hmm. And today, I think up until that point, I didn't think that the Australian dietary guidelines really addressed the obesity epidemic. And I, from a personal perspective, had become perimenopausal And I was getting more and more clients, particularly women in my age group, who were coming to me and saying, look, I've got this central adiposity, I've got this central belly fat sitting here, and it will not shift. And I'm eating less and less, which effectively what you and I know to be a calories in, calories out diet approach. And they said they were, killing themselves in the gym, and they just didn't know what they could do. And, why was this happening? Because they hadn't really changed what they were eating, and they were eating what we would call pretty healthy. Yeah. So when that happened, I took a bit of a sabbatical. And you know me well. We good researchers, you and I. Just for the people out there, Amanda and I were sort of rivals at Deakin University, and we pulled our high distinctions, but we constantly asked each other, "What did you get? What did you get?" So anyway, I went and did my research, and I uncovered some really fascinating randomized control trials, and some, which, for lack of a better word, is some very high-powered research. And it debunked and demystified a lot of things. And then from there, I knew that I needed further training in what I was doing. And I reached out to a very eminent Australian dietitian and asked her, in fact, I begged her if she would teach me about low carbohydrate diets, which she did.
Great.
And I can remember after the first 2.5 hours of getting off the phone from her, because we shared similar traits. She's considerably younger than me, but we both had polycystic ovarian syndrome. We both had fertility issues. We both struggled with our weight. I had actually had gestational diabetes during my pregnancies. Right. Weight had always been an issue for me. We both loved sport, and so at the end of that, I got off the phone after she finished telling me that everything I'd learnt about the standard Australian diet was a load of rubbish. And I remember just bawling my eyes out. Yeah, I was horrified.
So, there's so many things to talk about here. I almost don't know where to start.
I know. There's so much.
I'm going to start with some basic questions. So can you tell us, because Rachelle specialises in the keto diet and the paleo diet, can you tell us what they are, what one should eat when they're following those diets?
Sure. So those two diets, I tend to prescribe more of a ketogenic or a low carbohydrate diet to most of my clients. A paleo diet is a diet, everybody's going to say, oh, Pete Evans. Yeah. But Pete Evans has probably just brought it to light. So a paleo diet is, generally speaking, a diet that they use, they have their meats, and they have eggs, and they have a lack of processed sugar, but they will have fruits, and they will have non-starchy vegetables. But they'll also include some starchy vegetables like sweet potato, pumpkin, carrots, beets, turnips, parsnips, and squash. Both have nuts and seeds. But they tend to steer clear of grains and legumes and sugars, basically. Right. So the difference really between the two, when you look at a ketogenic diet, is lower in carbohydrate again. Yeah. And we would say yes to dairy, particularly butter, double thick cream, full fat, yogurts and things like that, whereas a paleo diet would not. The other thing to know about a paleo diet is that there is a relative lack of good evidence as to the benefits of a paleo diet, even
interesting.
Even though it is termed as something that is good for inflammation. So most of the time when you have people who are approaching and talk about a paleo diet, it's because they've got some form of inflammation, I see. Whether it's sinusitis or rhinusitis, or they might come to you and start talking about inflammatory bowel disease. And they will talk about things like dairy causing them, to get mucus in the back of their throat or things. Now, a ketogenic diet, there is now quite a substantial amount of very good evidence that has the potential, if people go into what's called nutritional ketosis, to bring about an anti-inflammatory effect, which is very powerful in the body. But to do that, you need a lot less carbohydrate. So a ketogenic diet, the only fruit that they would have would be berries, and they would have only vegetables that are above ground, no grains, no legumes, but of course they would have 80% of that ketogenic diet is fats, high healthy fats.
So where do those fats come from? What type of fats?
Sure. So in a ketogenic diet, the fats come from avocado oil, coconut oil, extra virgin olive oil, olive oils, butter, double thick cream, coconut milk, coconut cream, and of course the saturated fats in meats. Yeah.
And dairy.
Yeah.
So can you just give me an example of a day of eating a ketogenic diet, just so people can understand what it actually looks like?
Sure, yeah. Okay, well, I mean, the funny thing about that is people will, when I talk to them about a diet, they're often quite fearful. They think, oh God, what am I going to be eating?
Yeah.
In ketogenic diets, typically what we will do is we will combine it with something called intermittent fasting.
Oh, right, yes.
Which, fasting, obviously, there's a period of time where people don't eat. But by and large, the whole purpose of the ketogenic diet is to get somebody into something called nutritional ketosis. Now, an example of meals, so typically speaking, we would start the day with grass-fed bone broth or some sort of a bone broth, whether it be chicken or beef bone broth, and in that we would put at least a teaspoon of salt, and I can talk about why we need to do that. And then the next meal might be something like, a couple of eggs and bacon and pork sausage, maybe half an avocado.
Sounding like my worst nightmare.
No, this is how we roll. Baby spinach, tomato, have an avocado. Whereas a paleo would be something similar to that, but they would not have, they might not have the cream in their omelette or something like that. They might include, maybe some pumpkin with that. An alternative to that, if someone didn't want to cook breakfast, we certainly would both have option of a granola.
Right. I've seen paleo granolas.
Paleo granolas,
in the shop.
So they might have, banana with their paleo granola and some, unsweetened almond milk or something like that. Whereas a ketogenic diet, we would have a granola that was predominantly nut and seed based, much lower in carbohydrate. But we might have that with double thick cream.
Or yogurt, perhaps?
Yeah, or a high protein yogurt. And we would have that with some berries.
Right, not a banana.
Not a banana, exactly.
No bananas.
Nope, no bananas. Too high in carbohydrate. Yes, so now the reason why we would be a lot more careful with the fruit is because we don't want to take ourselves out of this state of nutritional ketosis.
Right. So if you eat something that doesn't conform, I guess, for want of a better word, with the diet, does that impacts it? Does it?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
So I'll explain nutritional ketosis. So because predominantly that's why people are coming to this diet. So if we think of a ketone as being a byproduct of how we break down our fat, okay, and that ketone, which becomes something called beta hydroxybutyrate, it's a short chain fatty acid.
Yeah. BHB, should we just call it that?
Yeah, BHB. is a very, very powerful anti-inflammatory. Now, if we eat high carbohydrate foods, then that knocks us out of that nutritional ketosis.
Right.
Okay, and that's what we're trying to avoid. And there is a certain level that we aim to achieve.
So it's very strict. It sounds very strict, does it?
I think early days, trying to get somebody's head around it, because it is so vastly different from how they have eaten in the last 50 years. But once you're in it, it's actually pretty simple. And I think it's pretty liberating. I mean, not being able to have, saturated fats and not being able to have this, not being able to have that. For anything that people would have in their normal diet, we have got a keto version of it.
Right.
So we certainly eat cakes and we have breads. And
bread?
bread. Yeah, we do, but we just have a ketogenic version of it that's been made with almond meal.
Right.
So all the things that everybody else would have, we have that too.
Okay.
It's just that we would have lashings of butter on our bread.
So, well, that was one of my questions because Rachelle has been following a keto diet for 2 years now, and she says she feels great. But I was going to ask you, are there any foods that you miss or not really anymore? Or
Look, I think initially when I first began it, one of the things that I missed, probably the most common answer that people will give, is bread.
Yeah.
But then I asked myself, well, was it the bread that I missed, or was it butter? I mean, unfortunately, I was one of those people that actually used to have margarine until I realised how shocking that is for you. But in saying that, no. I mean, I'm so satisfied with the level of saturated fat in my diet. And I have chocolate like everybody else. I just have 90% dark chocolate. So not really. There's not really anything that I miss. No.
Because I think for me that would be probably the one thing.
Bread.
Nice, fresh, crusty sourdough bread.
Yeah.
Just love it. And I love the smell of it too.
Yeah.
But anyway, I guess if you're used to it now and you're feeling really great.
Yeah, no, I get it. I mean, I think, and that's funny because about 3 years ago, I actually went away to Victoria and I actually learnt how to make sourdough bread properly. From a very historic bakery. And I laugh now because that's just not a part of my diet. So,
but you've got all those skills.
Yeah.
I wonder if you can make a paleo version of sourdough. I don't know.
Yeah, you absolutely can. You absolutely can. And there's definitely people out there who do ketogenic breads, and that's a whole thing. That's a whole nother chat.
Okay, so back to your clinical practice. So what are some of the benefits you've seen or witnessed with your clients who have come to you and followed the diet? What's happened?
Okay, so first and foremost would be weight loss.
Right.
And it's not if they lose weight, it's they 100% lose weight, definitely. That's been quite amazing. And I think the amount of weight loss, like it's pretty easy for them to lose 1 kilo a week.
Yeah.
In saying that, the difference between when I do it on a ketogenic diet as opposed to a calories in, calories out approach where people basically starve themselves, is those people are dropping their basal metabolic rate, and often they suffer with feeling cold and hungry and all the rest of it, whereas my patients wouldn't. And also when you're in nutritional ketosis, you maintain lean muscle mass. So you don't lose it, which is also really, really important. So weight loss is one. Another one would be the inflammatory conditions that I see. So type 2 diabetes, we are reversing type 2 diabetes, which is fantastic. So recently we've taken a patient who was on 220 units of insulin and weighed 145 kilos.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. She's now off all that insulin and she's just come under 100 kilos, and that's happened in about the last 4 months.
Oh, that's pretty quick.
Pretty quick.
Yeah.
Yep. And at that point, we're also getting medication reviews because their blood pressure is dropping. They don't need their high cholesterol medication anymore, and that sort of stuff. I also work with women who are trying to get pregnant. So they might have polycystic ovaries or endometriosis, and I'm very proud to say that 2 out of my 3 patients are now pregnant.
Oh, congratulations.
And
That's
to them
great.
as well. So and also Alzheimer's disease. So I have got a couple of clients that I'm working with who've got Alzheimer's disease, and that has been truly remarkable.
Well, so what kind of things have happened? Because I don't believe you can actually reverse it, can you? Can you slow it?
I think you can slow it down. I think that space it requires a lot more research. Also inflammatory bowel disease is another one as well. So that's been quite good. But the Alzheimer's has been incredible. So I did have a patient who came in to me. His partner was a doctor, and basically they had heard on the grapevine about, this sort of a diet, and he came in mute and unable to follow command. And we put him on a ketogenic diet and some medium-chain triglyceride oil, which is also very important for raising ketones in the bloodstream for the brain. And when he came back in next to see me, he was actually in an argument with his wife.
Wow, that is an amazing result.
Yeah, it was amazing. And we've definitely slowed it down, definitely. Because
and clearly made some improvements.
Absolutely. Yep. So, and there's another patient that's following something similar. So that's really rewarding. That's a fantastic part of my job.
So I guess without getting overly technical, do you think that those improvements you've seen have been a result of the weight loss, or of the actual dietary intake, or both?
Okay. So definitely there's always going to be some benefit when somebody loses weight, particularly towards an inflammatory response. But for the Alzheimer's patients and for the inflammatory bowel disease patients, these are people that don't need to lose weight. These are people that are either normal weight or underweight. What they need is they need to exist in a state of nutritional ketosis, which brings about this very powerful beta-hydroxybutyrate, this ketone, that is an anti-inflammatory. And when they've got that going on as a result of a ketogenic diet, then it stabilizes them and they're actually able to lead a pretty normal life.
Okay. What about someone, I'll use myself as an example, who is healthy and I don't really have any major issues that need to be addressed, and I don't need to lose weight? Would you say to someone like me that I should change my diet, or should I just keep doing what I'm doing? What's your view on that?
Yes, that's a great question. So that's pretty much my husband. So the other reason that people come to a ketogenic diet is, and this is what we haven't talked about yet, is because they've got something called insulin resistance.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. So insulin resistance is pre-diabetic pathology. And what we can have in the population is we can have people who are probably like yourself who are insulin sensitive, and then people like myself who are insulin resistant. Okay. Now, by and large, they seem to think that that's more of a genetic kind of a thing.
Right.
So would I recommend a ketogenic diet for somebody who is insulin sensitive? Yes, I would, because there are other properties that come about that everybody could benefit from having anti-inflammatory. And when we look at these things with beta-hydroxybutyrate, whether it's anti-aging, it's also anti-cancer prevention, and it's also really beneficial for the bowel. So this becomes interesting because you're probably aware that my husband, being a gastroenterologist, has got a PhD in colorectal cancer prevention. And we were at a symposium for ketogenic diets, and we were doing a lot of study into that. And we had the benefit of asking Dr. Stephen Finney, who's an eminent scientist in his field in this particular area. And my husband went up to him and said, well, what do you think about the microbiome in the bowel, and what do you think about, fiber and all this sort of stuff, and its role in, cancer prevention? And his response, after my husband sort of gave this very long-winded explanation about his PhD, well, he said to him, well, Jonathan, when we're talking about fiber and feeding the microbiome, effectively what these, microbiomes need is short-chain fatty acids. Okay. Yep. If you remember the very beginning of when you and I started talking, I talked about beta-hydroxybutyrate being a short-chain fatty acid.
Yes.
So I guess it comes down to, well, do we need to look at fiber and feeding the microbiome? Or is it more important that we have that whole short-chain fatty acid surging through our body and giving the same effect?
But can't we have both?
But why would you need it? If you've got beta-hydroxybutyrate surging through your body, it is one of the most powerful short-chain fatty acids, and effectively that's what it is. So your short-chain fatty acids are beta-hydroxybutyrate.
But that feeds the microbiome. We know that. Yeah. But what about the other role of dietary fibre, where it kind of, I guess,
bulking out the stool and all that sort of stuff,
sweeping out the system, kind of.
Yeah, so that's a really good question. So recently I was asked about that as well. And certainly, a ketogenic diet does not have to be a low fibre diet. Okay. That's often a bit of a myth. People assume that because, 80% of that diet is high healthy fats, that we don't take in much dietary fibre. That's
I certainly thought that, hence my question.
No. Yeah, so no, we would actually, someone like me and definitely my patients would have in the order of somewhere between, 4 to 5 cups of vegetable a day. Right. Easily.
Okay, so that would contain probably more fibre than the average person would eat.
Well, not only that, but we actually did a bit of a trial, my husband and we had a look at this because of him being...
I love personal experiments.
Yeah, because, being a gastroenterologist and having to get up and chat to the other gastroenterologists, they were ready to, go for him. But, we have such, nuts and seeds are also a huge part of our diet. And, you and I both know that there's lots of fibre in that as well.
Yes.
So by the time we'd actually taken a standard Australian diet and what we thought was eating, which was enough fibre, we were probably just under. It was actually pretty hard to hit. By the time we compared our ketogenic diet with all the vegetables and, the berries and the nuts and the seeds that we eat, in actual fact, we were actually having more dietary fibre in that than we were on our standard Australian diet.
Oh, that's interesting. I think most of what you described sounds really healthy. Where I'm having a bit of trouble getting my head around it is the fat content.
Yeah,
because
sure.
I don't feel great when I eat fat.
Yeah.
Is that something people struggle with? Is it a side effect? Do people get over it? How do you manage that side of it?
Yeah, initially sometimes people can struggle with it. And what I'd say to them, if you don't want to have butter, or if you don't want to have, double thick cream, or if you don't want to have, I know you're looking at me like that's really terrible, isn't it? If you don't want to use those things, then, you're quite okay to use extra virgin olive oil or olive oil or coconut oil with your cooking, or, a beautiful avocado or macadamia oil, that's fine. And certainly, the smaller you are, the less of that you would consume. Yes. But most people don't usually complain.
Okay.
Most people.
I guess it probably tastes pretty good.
It tastes pretty good.
Fats hold a lot of taste and flavour.
Yeah.
And what about getting the ratios right? Because as we said before, if someone eats a banana, it can upset the process. So how does someone know, am I eating the right amount of fat compared to carbohydrates, etc.? That's
a really great question. So I actually give people information about free apps, and I actually get them to follow an app.
Oh, that's a good idea.
And I talk them through it and I teach them. Because, a well-formulated ketogenic diet is about 80% healthy fats.
Yeah, it sounds a lot, but I guess in terms of the actual quantity, because it's so nutrient dense, it's not as much as it sounds.
Exactly.
If that makes sense.
Exactly. Yeah. 5% of it is carbohydrate, and then the remainder of it is a moderate amount of protein. There's a bit of a myth that people seem to think it's a high protein diet, but it's actually not.
No, I did read that. The paleo diet's more of a high protein approach.
It is high. It is a high protein diet, and it's also a high carbohydrate diet. Yeah.
And I was wondering, because I know you love research, has there been any long-term studies on the effects of the keto diet?
Absolutely have. Yeah. Certainly, if you're looking into that, would be Dr. Steve Phinney and also Dr. Jeff Volak.
Okay.
And perhaps we could chat about that at another time.
Or I can put some links in the show notes.
Yeah, absolutely. I've got quite a bit of that here, so we can go through that later on. Yep.
Cool. Oh, yeah, the other thing I was interested in, and I don't know how we sort of find common ground on this one, but what if someone doesn't want to eat animal products because they're a Buddhist, or, they just don't want to eat animals for any reason?
Like they might be vegan or vegetarian or something.
Can someone like that follow a ketogenic diet, or is it impossible?
No, it wouldn't be. So... well-formulated ketogenic diet for a vegetarian, absolutely. That would be quite easy to do.
Right. Oh, that's I didn't think that could potentially be possible. But that's probably more of an issue with the paleo, because that's more meat-based. Is that right? Or could you be a vegetarian paleo?
I know, definitely there are vegetarian paleos out there. I think in terms of what you're cooking and preparing, it becomes slightly more selective. I would say though it would probably be more difficult doing vegan. I think it'd be quite tricky.
It's already restrictive.
Yeah. I won't get into that topic, but another time we will talk about what I think about that.
Stay tuned.
Yeah. One of the things that does come up a little bit is, with all this eating of meat, and I have no doubt you're going to ask me a question about meat in a minute, the effects on the environment.
Yeah, I mean, that's one of the reasons that I personally don't eat a lot of meat.
Yeah.
Because I think that's my little contribution to the world, small as it might be.
Yeah.
What do you say about that?
Yeah, well, that's been quite fascinating, because I've shared similar thoughts on that in the past myself. And I guess I did a bit more research on it. And I think what we've got is if we have a look at how animals are now fed and how they're contained before they are slaughtered and then the meat comes into the supermarkets, predominantly these animals are grain fed.
Yeah, no good.
No good. And, I will often recommend to my patients to get grass-fed animals. I think it's important to know for the public out there that when we allow livestock to be grass-fed, it actually helps with the condition of soil. Because what's happening is those ruminants are basically just eating the grass right down to the root, but they don't pull the entire grass from out of the soil. And so we get soil stabilization and we actually get better soils. So, I'm very much an advocate for seeing farmers doing grass-fed livestock.
It's what cows eat.
Yeah.
They don't eat grains. Well,
they
they're
don't
not
eat grains. They shouldn't know. And so I think the other thing I was going to mention, whether it's your cat or your dog or humans, when we have carbohydrate and too much carbohydrate, particularly in a person that's got insulin resistance, is they produce an enormous amount of insulin in response to that carbohydrate. Now, for you who's insulin sensitive, not so much. For someone like me, I would produce a huge amount of insulin. The thing that's important to understand about the hormone insulin is when we produce too much of that, we inhibit lipolysis, which means we stop the breakdown of our fat. We can't access it. We can't break it down. So if we come back to those women that came to me in my clinic saying, why can't I lose this essential body fat? What's going on here? I'm eating less and less and I'm killing myself in the gym. It's because they're probably insulin resistant, pumping out too much insulin in response to the carbohydrate amount that they're having. And as a result of that, they can't access their own body fat stores to break it down. So what a well-formulated ketogenic diet does, it allows you access to that body fat to break it down by getting you to drop your carbohydrate. And if you drop your carbohydrate load, then effectively you're not having anywhere near the sort of insulin response that you need. And so that's the same whether it's humans or animals. It's the same. So if we come back to, grass-fed animals and we look at them, the marbling of fat that happens in an animal that has grass-fed as opposed to grain is completely different.
Yeah. The other thing I think too is about grain-fed animals is that they're often given a lot of antibiotics.
Yeah.
Because, they're not designed to eat grain, so they get sick.
Yes.
And, that has so many implications for drug resistance and all sorts of things. So I think the real problem is probably in the US with those massive factory farms. I don't know if you've seen any documentaries about those, but they're pretty frightful.
There's some pretty cool documentaries out there at the moment. One that I would encourage people to go and have a look at, just if you're trying to get your head around this and where's this going, is if there's a documentary called The Magic Pill. Yes, I know it's been put out by Pete Evans, but Pete Evans, he's a interesting character. But there's something about Pete Evans which makes him a disruptor. There's a reason why he keeps coming back time and time and again. If you put aside it being Pete Evans and actually have a look at the documentary, and particularly in Australia, I want people to focus on what's happened to the Aborigines. Have a look at that, and it's a bit of a game changer. And also listen to what Professor Tim Noakes has to say. And I think once people have a look at that, that's a bit of a game changer. They start to question, well, hang on a minute, what's actually happened here?
Okay, I haven't seen what's it called? The Magic Pill.
The Magic Pill.
The only time I've seen Pete Evans is when he's been scoffing things down
My Kitchen Rules. Well, I do laugh at that because I know he's paleo, so I think, okay.
It's a very paleo dinner.
Have there weren't any legumes in that?
Yeah. There's so many things. I think we have to have another session because I'd like to talk about athletes.
Yeah, I'd love to talk about athletes.
But I think that sort of merits its own session, if that's okay with you.
It does. Look, I would love to talk about that because I have a son who is in the first 8 at school, and he's a rower, and he is the only low carb athlete in that boat.
Oh, that's interesting? Yeah,
it is interesting, and he's doing very well. So I would love to talk about that.
Yeah, and I do quite a lot of training myself, so I tend to go down the whole carb route. So I think we could have a pretty fascinating discussion because there is a lot of research into this area at the moment, and there are athletes who follow a keto diet, But conversely, there are athletes who follow a vegan diet. So there's a huge range. So it's pretty interesting.
So do you remember the person who basically was the father of carb loading? Do you know who that was?
No.
That was Professor Tim Noakes.
Oh, really?
Yeah. He wrote The Law of Running.
Oh, right.
Yeah. Which for anybody who's a runner or a marathon athlete, they will know, that. So he's completely done a complete 180.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
I must say I tried carb loading once and I felt so bloated and miserable that it was a failure.
Yeah. Interesting. Yeah, it was becoming a bit old-fashioned these days to do
Tim Crow said the same thing because I asked him about
Tim
it.
Crow,
He said, look, he just eats his normal diet before a race and he's a pretty handy marathon runner.
Yeah. He's probably insulin sensitive and in nutritional ketosis, I'd say.
Yeah, anyway, I think what we might do is wrap it up for today. But I think we're going to have to come back, Rachelle. There's too many questions still floating around.
Yeah, there's a lot. And I'd love to. There's so much
Okay.
I'm happy to share and
Great.
to chat to, your listeners about and, side effects of keto diets and all that sort of stuff. We can get back into that. So, yeah.
So if someone wants to connect with you, what's the best way to do that?
So probably the best way there's a couple of ways. So if you wanted to chat with me about your own personal experience, you can give my rooms a call.
Mm-hmm.
So that's Unley Park Specialist Centre, which is 386 Unley Road, Unley
I'll put
Park.
that in the show notes.
Yep. And the phone number is 8373 4944. Or you can also get some really good information from me from my Instagram account. So that's Rachelle Martin 69. And you can see stuff there. That's probably the two ways that you can get a hold of me. Yeah.
Brilliant. Okay. Thanks so much for coming on the show.
Pleasure. Thank you for having me.
That was Rachelle Martin, nutritionist who specialises in low carb and keto diets. My mind is abuzz. I have so many more questions to ask. There will definitely be another episode with Rachelle where we dive more deeply into some of the issues we only touched on today. Nutrition is a relatively new science, and therefore I think it's important to keep an open mind and be alert to new scientific evidence. A constant refrain of mine is that there is no one right diet for everyone. Humans could not have thrived in so many diverse and sometimes extreme environments if that were the case. However, it does seem that there are certain diets that are more favourable in given conditions. For example, the complete exclusion of gluten in the case of celiac disease. Another example is the use of ketogenic diets to help control seizures in some people with epilepsy, specifically children with seizures that do not respond to medication. Scientists are not 100% sure of the mechanism responsible for that, but it is a really interesting area of ongoing research. Anyway, I'll keep reading and researching in order to provide current and credible evidence to you. Thank you for listening today. You can subscribe to Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast on YouTube. Hit the subscribe button, and while you're there, click on the bell to be alerted when new episodes are available. You can also subscribe on your favourite podcast app, iTunes, Stitcher, Spreaker, Spotify, or Google Podcasts. And you can follow the podcast on Twitter, Instagram, and Facebook. Direct links to all social media can be found on the subscribe page of my website at www.amandaswellbeingpodcast.com. If you would like to contact me, you can send me a message via the contacts page on my website. Please feel free to suggest topics you'd like to learn more about and people you'd like to hear interviewed, and I will do my best to deliver that to you. Producing the podcast is a labour of love. We put in a lot of time, money and effort behind the scenes. So if you enjoy Amanda's Wellbeing Podcast and would like to make a contribution via Patreon, PayPal or by Amazon to help ensure that we continue to provide you with excellent guests, please visit the contribute page on my website. Also, and finally, please take a minute to leave a rating on iTunes. It improves visibility of the podcast and will help me source some excellent guests. Thank you for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.